our second in this series. Today we're going to be talking about the new normal with a very illustrious group panel. We're hoping Mr. Kevin Carey will join us here before too long. So welcome. Thanks for making time. I know everybody's busy, all busier than we think we should be right now, but it's a good thing. My name is Nestor Benavides. I'm CEO of Bureau Veritas' Building Assessment and Project Management Group, and I'll be hosting the session today. I'm going to introduce our speakers in reverse alphabetical order. In Texas, we have Mr. David Hoskins, who's Director of Facilities Management for G6 Hospitality. He's focused on all the aspects of managing the properties for G6. He was with 7-Eleven before. David is a retired disabled veteran, served in the U.S. Army and is trained to speak Spanish at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. So, David Hoskins, thank you for your service and bienvenido. Gracias por estar con nosotros.
Gracias. Glad to be here.
Very good. We also have Brian Gilchrist out of North Carolina. Brian is Executive VP of Good Hospitality, Inc., headquartered, he's in North Carolina. The business owns many hotels, is in the Midwest. He's owner and operator, and he was an Arthur Murray dance instructor. So if we have time at the end, we're going to see if he can show us some special steps. We also have with us, hopefully soon, Kevin Carey, who's Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of AHLA, which is the American Hotel and Lodging Association, responsible for all revenue-generating operations, including membership engagement, business development, conferences, and events. Kevin has the trifecta this year. He has 3 children, one in middle school, one in high school, one in college, all graduating from home. So congratulations to your children, Kevin. And the last one is, not least, is Mr. David Abrahams from VP Engineering, Design, and Construction. David manages infrastructure capital, emergency response, life safety, energy and water management. David and his wife were adoptive parents in both Maine and Colorado. 10 years ago, they adopted Samantha, who's been an absolute love and joy in their life. And I appreciate, David, you sharing that with us. That is very special.
My pleasure, Nestor. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. We're hoping here Kevin will join us in the near future. Oh, there he is now, Mr. Kevin Carey. Welcome.
Hi there. Sorry for the difficulty.
Not at all. Not at all. So let's get started. I think we're all tired of hearing about navigating a quote unquote new normal. Normal being a typical state of condition, and nothing right now seems typical. I think that part of what is interesting is learning from each other through these times and hearing other people's opinions, specifically people that are working day and day in different industries and how things are evolving for them. I love the quote, "Nothing ever goes back to normal. All that happens is your concept of normal changes," by Alison von Dieber, who's an author. So it's not a new normal, right? It's just the next phase of whatever it is we're living. And I appreciate you gentlemen being here to help us make a little more sense of it. So a couple of things logistically. Please send us your questions via the Q&A on the chat function or the Q&A function. We'll be looking for those, trying to weave those into the conversation. And we'll have a couple of different types of question asking. We'll try to keep it moving, keep it interesting, and get lots of thoughts and ideas out there for everybody. Starting off, trying to get to know you guys a little bit better. Let's start with Mr. David Abraham. What do you see as the most significant or meaningful change that's happened, from the beginning of 2020 to the end of 2020 for you or your business?
I think as we've all experienced, Nestor, the challenge of people having to shelter in place and stay away from people as a society. Everybody's used to getting together, large events, and I think that's really been difficult for people, and that's certainly tough. And there's obviously the social impact of the amount of people, 40 million, whatever the number is, that are claiming unemployment, out of work. So that's a real big impact on society.
Absolutely. I think we're just starting to get the sense of what that's going to look like.
Right.
How about you, Mr. Hoskins? How do you think this is?
Me, I'm starting to feel a little bit, I read a little bit about a gentleman by the name of Howard Hughes, and he was real eccentric about touching and being around anything that, virus related or disease related. For him to do one thing took him about 15 pieces of paper towels, and I'm starting to feel that way a little bit, more aware of my surroundings. And so that's probably the biggest difference, is just being more aware of my surroundings and what's available for me to continue to protect myself, my family, and the business, of course.
Appreciate that. Mr. Gilchrist.
Yeah, I think similar to David, just awareness. Awareness of surroundings, awareness of my own health. I think that you start to get a cough or a runny nose, your mind has a tendency to wander. The folks around you, somebody now coughs and you shoot them a quick look. You see somebody take their mask off, things of that nature that I just think that it's an awareness of what's around you, and just trying to stay as calm as you can with what's happening, and try not to overreact. But I think in a lot of ways with our human nature, we do want to overreact to what's taking place, and have to try to stay calm and just stay the course.
Indeed. Mr. Carey, glad to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Please, Kevin's fine. I think two thoughts. One is maybe just how fragile things can be, whether it's our business models, our daily norms, in some cases, the vulnerability you now appreciate in terms of your health or your family's health, or your guests or customers. But perhaps on the other extreme, on a more positive footing, just a level of collaboration and teamwork that we're seeing, and people recognizing, while cliche to say that we all are in this together and need to work constructively to find the path out in many respects.
Path through. Thank you. Very good. So that's your perspective, kind of bigger picture. We'll kind of get more and more specific to the guests and the hotel effects. So let's shift to your guests, right? I mean, how do you expect your guests' expectations on the experience of visiting your hotels to change? And again, for folks out there, Kevin Carey represents the American Hotel and Lodging Association, so he's got a different and possibly a broader perspective. But how do you expect the guest experience to evolve through this short-term and long-term? Let's start with Kevin and go backwards.
Yep. Sure. So, Nestor, your point's well taken in terms of the perspective or the vantage point that we have. We do see and receive inputs from all aspects of the industry, from the largest players to the smallest players, those who operate 1,000-room properties down to smaller extended stay footprints. And I think consistently what we're hearing, and I think you'll see that through the role AHLA is playing, is the focus on making sure the hotel environment is clean and safe, and also ensuring that the work environment for our employee base is similarly, that they have that assurance of a safe and clean work environment. That's going to be critical in the reopening phase that we're certainly in right now.
Appreciate that. Brian?
I think what we're seeing is, the guests really want a lot of transparency. Normally we just go about our day and do what we do to satisfy their needs and their wants, but they want to know how we're going to do it up front. So open communication, and much more communication and more detailed communication on a regular basis via websites, via check-in letters, via dialogue. We're seeing that the guests definitely want to know more so than they probably have in the past, and making sure that we communicate as much as we can up front before they arrive, so that there are no surprises. So I think, again, having to get into more detail about what we do day to day that we've always taken for granted, we now need to make sure we're sharing with the guests ahead of time.
Appreciate that. David Hoskins?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that is most important is having a safe, clean environment, that we share with them what our procedures are, because they're interested in knowing that they're in a safe environment for not only themselves and their families. And I want to say that we're going to go back to work. I mean, it's just inevitable, and that's one of the things that I believe it was in 1912 when the United States became one of the world's largest economies. And when it did, people and children were dying of stubbed toes and cough. So I think the new norm that we're talking about is a lot more awareness. But I guess they are going to go back to work. They're going to need a place to stay. And most importantly, if we're transparent, just like Brian said, if we're transparent in what we're doing and we have awareness, I think that will go a long way. Something as simple as going into a men's or women's restroom, and I've been into a men's. I don't think I've been into a women's unless had a drink and walked out really quickly. But anyway, and I'm sure a lot of the gentlemen here can say that a lot of people use a restroom and they don't wash their hands when they leave. And having that awareness, whether it be with signage or a trash barrel and maybe some sanitizer for them to wash their hands as they walk around, that awareness, just showing that we're reaching out like that, I think goes a long way.
Very good. So definitely a theme of hygiene and cleanliness so far. David, do you echo that? Is there anything else you would add to it? Or?
Yeah, I would definitely echo it. I would say that I think even, one other point about it is we, as an industry, we need to be prepared for the probing questions, right? Because I think some people are going to look for the visual signs. They're going to look for the visual activity of cleaning. They're going to look for the signs. Some are going to probe a little deeper. What chemical are you using? How are the people trained? How often are they doing it? How often is this conducted? I think, we have to be prepared as an industry to be able to back up, just like we would do when the fire chief comes and asks us about our inspections. And we were prepared to tell him when we did, what we did. And I think that's going to be critical for some hotel guests. Some will be more, casual about it, but some I think are going to be quite aggressive with their questions.
So question kind of to one or two of you right now, whoever wants to take it, is you're all talking about cleanliness and hygiene. Do you see this as a shift in the immediate term? Or do you really see a kind of a shift long-term in the expectation of people regarding hygiene? I'll go to Mr. Hoskins first.
Sure. I think the shift is fluid. The CDC continually changes and updates their recommendations. Mask, no mask, surface, no. I mean, it's a constant flux and fluid change, and the more that we keep up with that information and adjust and overcome those differences in the new data that comes out, and as we maybe get more information as this virus spreads around more, and we're learning that does it come from surfaces or is it just in the air from people? Or I think just staying up with the latest data and like I said, being able to adjust and overcome the fluidity of the situation.
That's fair. So it'll evolve as everything else evolves. So let's go to I'm going to ask Kevin. What are the key priorities that you're working on right now as you try to move your association forward?
Sure, and from the outset, the association's focus was really on the relief set of efforts, and that was an active dialogue with the federal government, both with the administration, starting with the president, vice president, certainly through Treasury, and with the Congress, and manifests itself in the industry's efforts to influence the shape and content of the CARES Act, and to whether it was the Payroll Protection Act or other lending vehicles that were provided through that, was to represent the industry's interests, make sure that the scope of the impact and the devastation really that the industry was experiencing and the human toll in terms of workers and the lost revenue was fully appreciated. We've certainly seen the dialogue shift over the last several weeks towards reopening and recovery. in this time frame. Certainly all the organizations represented on the call here today are prominent members of and active participants in AHLA and our release of our safe stay guidelines to help frame and set a common focus and baseline of standards for the industry to adopt across the full spectrum of properties has been our most immediate focus. So that shift from relief to reopening and even looking ahead optimistically to more of the path to recovery is how we've been framing and following the roadmap on behalf of the industry.
Very good. So let me tweak the question a little bit, right? So to Brian Gilchrist, within the hygiene area, is there something specific that's a short-term priority? And is there anything that's a really high priority outside of hygiene for you right now?
I think the biggest piece, it's consistency. You've got Kevin's group that's, it has stuff that's out there. You've got the CDC, we've got Hilton, we've got Marriott, we've got IHG, you've got Hyatt. Everybody's coming out with something different. And I think it's the one time that I think we truly all need to try to work together. Because I think we end up then sending those mixed messages to those guests, and each brand's, in my opinion, trying to one up the next. I think that what Kevin and his group was sufficient and what we needed to try to get out initially. I think that there's still a lot of unknowns, back to David's comment earlier. And I think that in a lot of cases like this, we're really trying to quickly respond, but I think in a lot of cases we are overreacting to it in a lot of cases to, I guess, eliminate the unknown, but it's always going to be out there. We have to at least let our guests know that we're making the effort and that we're all at least doing something. And I think that those guests are looking for that consistency, and the AHLA has come out with that consistency. And I think that while it's okay to add to it, going from hotel to hotel as a third-party manager and as an owner, it makes it difficult to make sure that you're abiding by what those guidelines are per the brands and per the organizations that are out there. And I think that that's the main focus, is creating the consistency, and then just making sure that, unfortunately, my mind goes to legal very quickly with who's the first guest that's going to say we didn't do what we were supposed to do, and so therefore there's the lawsuit waiting for you on the table. I think that again, the open communication, the transparency, having a plan and making sure you have a plan in writing, just in case anything should happen, that you can say that you've gone through. So the logs that you once had that you may or may not have done, you definitely need to be doing right now to make sure that you've got things documented for when those guests, like David said, drill down and drill down and drill down. You can say, ma'am, sir, this is what we're doing.
So the challenge of a consistency, the challenge of the legal and liability side, and the importance of having a written plan. Again, let me tweak the question a little bit. Let's focus on the challenges, right, to the short-term priorities, which hygiene obviously is a big one. Let's go to Mr. Abraham. What are the biggest challenges in the immediate term towards hygiene and building confidence with guests?
Sure. So
or in general,
for park hotels and resorts, we are an owner, so we are fortunate to be aligned with some great operators, and they're doing a lot of the things you've heard about, right? Amping up their sanitation processes and stuff. And so I would just, from what I understand and what I'm assuming is they do that. Obviously, as we've had hotels that have been closed and they're reopening, I would assume there's some pretty significant, onboarding that has to happen to get staff retrained and ready, to Brian's point, to consistently execute. From my perspective, one of the challenges is, as we look to layer in potentially some technology to support those cleaning activities and sanitizing activities, what are the effective technologies that will work against COVID? And it's very challenging, right? The science is so limited right now. To David Hoskins' point, it's changing on a daily basis. So as we try to figure out that's the big challenge as I see it in our world, is what's the right technology to align ourselves with that helps with this problem and hopefully, might help with a future problem. Very difficult to do that when you you try to deal with a problem now you don't quite understand, and but you're trying to make sure if you invest that you're solving for the future as well.
Have you heard of any specific technologies that you're considering?
There's a couple out there that are pretty exciting. Obviously the UVC sanitation qualities of UVC lighting. How to use that, potentially being an airborne virus. Ways to deal with it in air handling equipment. To use that technology that's out there. So we're looking at several of those.
Very good, Mr. Hoskins. And I'm calling you by your last names, not to be really formal, but because there's two of you here, two Davids. So challenges in the immediate term, and again, specific to hygiene or in general towards navigating the next couple of months, what are the biggest ones?
I think one of the largest challenges that I've seen looking in would be just trying to understand all of the differences across the municipalities. Those of us with several hotels in different, all parts of the United States and even in the country, find that every municipality wants to say what goes on in their particular area. Open pools, don't open pools, essential, non-essential. Keeping up with that amount of detail and making sure that you're compliant and taking that proactive step has been very challenging from the G6 perspective. I know that. We have been staying proactive, and it's just understanding those changes because they are fluid. They change daily.
There's a lot of them, and they are in motion. So that is a big one. Very good. So let's shift gears one more time and talk about capital expenditure. Most of you guys are involved in projects, construction capital expenses. How is that changing for you for the balance of 2020? Will you still be spending capital, and will you be doing it with different focus, or are you reducing your capital spend? Let's start with David again. David Abrahams.
Nestor, Park has evaluated our capital budget for 2020. We've adjusted it appropriately based on the current environment, and we will be executing those capital projects aggressively to get them done. Our focus has changed a little bit, right? Obviously, we've got hotels that are closed, so we're really focused on supporting the ones that are open and being prepared to support the ones as they reopen and those essential needs that they can be successful, as we come out the other side of this.
So are you still planning on spending the same amount as you were before for 2020?
No, we've reduced it, almost a little over by half. We've cut our capital spending for the year, and we'll evaluate going forward.
But are you still funding the same kinds of projects, or is that capital now being spent in different ways?
Different ways. We have some core things that we always do around safety and taking care of the asset. And we had some ongoing projects they're pretty large and important to keep rolling. So those stayed.
Gotcha. Now, Mr. Hopkins, you've got a lot of properties. Also, how is your capital spend changing for the balance of the year?
I think I can say this has kind of been common from some of my colleagues and other professionals in the industry, is that revenue kind of drives a lot of the expenses, and so continuing to evaluate those and prioritize them. Right now the priority is hygiene, and how are we going to start ramping back up in the areas to make sure that the rooms are ready, and that's what we've been focusing on. And I think, another aspect of that is that everyone realizes that if we just stop, putting money into our assets, that life cycle cost comes back. So the quicker we get back to norm and get our properties going and to an occupancy level that supports all of those projects, the better. The sooner the better.
Pay me now or pay me later. So obviously this theme of building guest confidence. Kevin, what are you doing? What can be done to give those guests more confidence to start populating hotels again? You're on mute. You're on mute, Kevin.
There we go. Just to focus on the guest side of things, I'm sure everyone's seeing the same survey data that we are, and whether those guests are leisure travelers, business travelers, or group. everyone's consistently putting cleanliness and safety at the top of their list about feeling comfortable to return to travel, and whether that's via air travel or their stays in hotels, and wanting to have a lot of visual recognition of those new approaches. That's really why we wanted to bring together the industry and have a single voice in trying to acknowledge and have a common baseline, as well as to communicate through our channels and have.
What are those channels? Like, what do you see as the main channels of communication?
The way in which we speak on behalf of the industry to the media, whether that's the national press or the industry trade press, and certainly to governments at all levels. Someone was making the point earlier, I think, David, of following the regulations and changes in terms of open status and whatnot on this issue of cleanliness and other things that are going to drive new expenses for the properties to establish a single voice with the goal of having that become the industry standard, so that the government doesn't feel a need to jump in and create a complex patchwork across 50 states or further at the local levels.
Gotcha. So, Brian, how would you answer that question? What are you doing, and then how are you communicating that to build confidence with guests?
I think I've mentioned it earlier, is just obviously cleanliness. People want to feel safe when they're coming in. And I guess repeat David's comments, that it's about cleanliness and it's keeping up with what the different municipalities are dealing with, because it may change again from city to city, from county to county within the same state. And guests don't necessarily know that. So I think it's, again, being out in front of it when reservations are made, trying to call the guests ahead of time to let them know that the pool's not open, to let them know that the exercise room isn't open, to let them know we don't have a buffet, whatever it may be. It's just trying to be proactive in that communication, so that when they get there, it's nothing unexpected, because as soon as something hits them unexpectedly, their minds will spin out of control, and there will be a lot of other issues beyond just that. So just trying to be proactive with the communication.
Very good. So, in the spirit of full disclosure, at Bureau Veritas, we're providing certification services, right? Hygiene certification. David Hoskins, what's your take on third-party certifications? I mean, is that something you guys are considering? Is that something that's important in general? How would you think about third-party certifications for hygiene?
Yeah, I know third-party certifications are currently being looked at. I'm not the decision maker, so I know that everyone's looking at it. I know that G6 just released its Clean at 6 policies and program, which of course, like Kevin had said, using media to get that out, as well as informing our guests if there is a particular order in a particular city. We're letting the guests know. If the order is to wear a mask, we ask them to wear a mask, or we might suggest it. The difficulty is how you kind of on the legality. I think Brian had mentioned that it's important to make sure that we stay within the means of what's legal, of course, and it may be different from area to area depending on their. So it's fairly difficult.
Mr. Abraham, any thoughts on third parties inspection and certification?
Yeah, again, leave that mainly to our operators. As an owner of hotels, my focus and my team's focus is really third-party certification of some of the technologies we're looking at, because again, you don't want to put something in if you're going to promote it as doing X, you got to be able to back it up. So we'll be looking at third-party certification in that arena.
Awesome. So one of the ways that we talked about capital spend, and obviously there's other folks on the audience that might be service providers to hospitality industry. You're spending a little bit less. Any thoughts or any guidance to service providers for the hospitality sector about what to expect or how you're planning on using them differently? Let's start with Brian.
I think for me, again, I don't want to overreact. I think similar to what David Abrams saying is that you can't just look right now. You've got to make sure that what you're investing in is going to be something that is going to hold up, because you don't have the revenues to spend like you may have in the past. So what you spend it on has got to be, spot on. And, there's a lot of things out there, but, can you get the sanitary wipes? Can you get the sanitary stations? It's on a 4-week back order, and that's great, but guests are still expecting it. So if you're out there trying to provide a third-party service, make sure that it's not just about now, that it's something that can sustain itself farther on down the road, to make folks like us want to purchase that program or purchase whatever it is from that vendor.
Are you seeing a lot of issues with the supply chain?
Yeah, I think.
Let's Brian
Yeah,
first.
I'm sorry. Yep. I think right now our biggest issue is wipes, and also just the sanitizing stations themselves that we're trying to put up around the hotels. And you're on a 2-week to 4-week back order, and different brands are coming out with different things where they want their logos on them and such. And now you're 6 weeks out. But what do you do in the meantime? You've got to get something, and so you don't want to. Again, you've got to be careful with.
What do you do in the meantime?
You got to get the generic piece and get it up there. You got to do it.
Very good, Mr. Hoskins.
Yeah, I would say that in general, revenue kind of drives expenses in a way. We have the ability to make some decisions on what the budget carries. I think one of the things that we're also saying is that as we have employees that may not be as comfortable as they were doing certain things, that those things could be outsourced. And so that's an opportunity for vendors to, if we typically had internal maintenance personnel doing things in the rooms and we're not having them do those things, or there's not enough of them to go around now, vendors can help pick up that slack, of course.
Very good. Let's talk about, one of the big ways that hospitality industry makes money is through events, right? Through conferences, through bringing people together. Obviously, that's been significantly impacted. How's the industry adjusting to that? What kinds of things are being done to potentially do that in a different way or accelerate that, Kevin?
Yeah, it's still a work in progress. I think we see that not only in our own events that we put on behalf of our membership in the industry, where we're still looking to shift out to Q4 and or to 2021 our own events, but as we regularly participate in what I would call the industry major events, if it's NYU or the lodging conference, there's still a lot of activity and uncertainty around how those are going to proceed and under what format and with what size restraints and social distancing norms that'll be established. We also have visibility through to a lot of the service providers in this category who work closely as allied members of the association, so the PSAVs and others. I think from an event standpoint, there's still very much of a watching this evolve mode at the moment, but also recognizing that there's likely to be a mix.
Is there any geography right now that's allowing? What's the largest event size that you know of around the country? Do you know?
Boy, I think this is not scientific, but 50-person gatherings or below seem to be the norm, and that doesn't permit a very large meeting or conference. So I think there invariably will be some mix of in-person supplemented by virtual participation, and that certainly ushers in a whole new technology experience to networking and participation. So I think that trend you'll see flourish moving forward.
Very nice. Appreciate that. Mr. Abraham, any thoughts on, when they come back, how they come back? What are you doing to try to accelerate that?
I would tell you that it's a little bit out of my realm of responsibility, but to play on what Kevin said, I think there's a lot of brilliant people that work in the meetings industry, and I'm sure they're working hard now to figure out how to conduct meetings in a safe and productive way. my perspective on it is how do I provide the safest, healthiest building possible? You know, how do I work with our operators to make sure the building is performing as designed or better, you know, so that we're providing a very healthy environment. That's something you know, if you talked earlier about service providers, I think that's gonna be a focus for us, you know, making sure that our buildings are healthy and that we, you know, it's always been important to us. You know, occasionally maybe we've taken our eye off the ball there for various reasons, and we can't do that anymore. We got to make sure that the buildings are operating as they're supposed to be.
Very good. So we're going to shift the question mode now, and I'm going to share my screen so that people can see the questions. We'll move a little bit faster than we have been, and hopefully you can still see us all on your screen. So kind of one sentence answers, right? Kind of single thought answers, and we'll go around the table. What do you think people are wrongly assuming about how life's going to be at the end of 2020? What do people have? What do you disagree with in terms of the general status quo? Let's start with Mr. Abraham and go through.
Again, I would just think that people think they have a clear vision of what it's going to look like, and I don't think it's clear yet.
Fair enough. Mr. Hoskins?
I don't think anything like this can ever happen again. You know, primarily, I don't think that the world can afford it, for one. And, you know, two, I think that, you know, 97% of the humans in the world fed themselves by way of hunting and gathering and things like that back in the 18th century. We're not going to revert back to that. So I'm sure that things will get back to somewhat of normalcy pretty quickly.
Awesome. Mr. Gilchrist?
I just think similar to David, there's just so many unknowns, but people are impatient and they want normal now, and now just isn't going to happen. I think that it's going to take time to play out, like other things of this nature have in previous times, and this too shall pass.
So they're wrongly assuming the pace of recovery. And Kevin?
Yeah, you know, I've also heard people describe it as the new abnormal as well. But I think the missing or the wrong assumption is that it'll be a static state. It's certainly, I don't think anyone has a clear enough vision to 6 weeks, let alone 6 months from now. And so the environment we're navigating is going to continue to evolve, and we all need to be nimble in addressing that.
Very good. So again, single thought, and we've talked about pools and other things, but are there any amenities or benefits that guests have gotten accustomed to that you think are going to disappear for a while? Kevin?
I think regardless of what your environment is, I think the high five is at risk in the future.
Brian?
From my perspective within the select service, just the breakfast buffet in general, you know, I think is a thing of the past, and it's going to be a lot of folks that are going to have to figure out another way of delivering that same type of service without having an actual buffet.
So based on how my suits are feeling and fitting, that might be a good thing. Mr. Hoskins, what's going away?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I noticed yesterday, I took my family out to eat, and we drove around because my wife was adamant about eating outside on a patio. So every place that we went to was completely packed. And so, you know, I think the thought of mass gatherings in an enclosed area kind of gets people a little bit uncomfortable. So anything around mass gatherings in enclosed areas is probably going to change a little bit. You know,
did you actually eat at a restaurant yesterday?
We actually found one finally that we could enter from the side and you know, outside and eat outside, and then
that's exciting.
We're socially distanced, but
you didn't have to hold your whole breath for the whole time through dinner. Mr. Abraham.
Well, I guess as a frequent traveler like everybody else in the panel and on the phone, and someone who's been in the hospitality industry all my adult life, I would say that I'm not ready to kill any particular amenity at this point. I think hoteliers will figure out what people want and find a way to deliver it. I think there'll be adjustments, but I think you know, things will stay alive.
Understood. So I'm going to just ask a couple of you guys now, but Brian, any specific thoughts on gyms and hot tubs?
I think gyms will stick around. I think, right now we've got machines shut down so that you can at least try to have a little bit of distance between folks in the gym. Hot tubs for us in the select service environment, at least in the markets that we're in, we had started to get away from those and actually fill them in and extend the exercise rooms. So I think that for us, that will continue in that direction.
That makes sense. Mr. Hoskins?
Yeah, I think as we learn more about what the long-term effects of what we're dealing with, that'll help us guide us into what decisions need to be made. Maybe hot tubs kill the virus and we don't need to worry about it. But then again, maybe surfaces are not a big issue like they were. Maybe it's just distancing. So we don't know what we don't know yet, but it is evolving. And so I think just, anything is possible at this point, and one thing affects the other.
Fair enough. So I love all your thoughts on this one. We'll start with Kevin. What do you think technology is out there that's going to make the biggest difference in the coming year and beyond?
Yeah, the whole area of contactless, whether that's payments, guest registration, guest checkouts, that area it has been progressing, not necessarily below the surface, but I think you'll have a massive acceleration effect here. You hear that from the conversations with the mobile and online players, certainly all the payment services and others, that experience is going to be pushed through all touch points across the guest experience.
Brian?
I would agree. I think it's about, touchless key entry and anything related to less interaction, at least in the initial few months, for sure.
Mr. Hoskins?
I would say that, I would echo Kevin's thoughts on that. Anything touchless is probably the new technology that we're going to see widely brought out around, whether it be touchless faucets, touchless toilets, touchless doors, all of those things, and even equipment to whether it's I think the UV walking machine that sanitizes things. All that touchless stuff is real. I think going to be real important in the future.
Very good. Rounding us out, Mr. Abraham.
Again, as I mentioned earlier, pretty excited to test out and understand more about the bipolar ionization that you can put in air handlers and how that may play into the whole equation.
So let me ask you guys a question. We'll kind of focus there more on technology. Open question to you guys. Is there a specific idea that you've seen in hotels and the hospitality sector in the last 2 months that's being discussed that you think is particularly impactful, creative, that has surprised you?
I could touch on one that I've seen recently. Was a elevator that had foot pedals to press so that you can go up or down, which you don't have to touch the buttons, and it's something that definitely we're looking at.
I would say antimicrobial services and surfaces and understanding those better and what their abilities and limitations are.
Very good. Brian or Kevin, any thoughts?
Nothing on my end.
Like the foot pedals and elevators, that could create a
For sure.
kind of a
For sure.
cage match effect in the elevator. People trying to get to their floor first.
Then we have to worry about people falling when they're trying to push the right button.
The football.
Very good. So again, from all of you, what's the biggest opportunity that's going to come out of this last few months as we go into the future? Let's start with Kevin and work our way back.
We certainly look across all the segments of the industry, but certainly those in the leisure space as well as the non-urban environments certainly are going to capture, seem to be the first returning back. So from a timing and a return to reopening, I think those opportunities are ones you're starting to see more take shape.
Brian, what's the biggest opportunity?
Just large group gatherings. Kevin mentioned the lodging conference. I think certainly was looking forward to being able to get out to that again this year, but missing the Hunter conference. Even us within the industry, we have our own conferences, and trying to get back to what that's going to be as we move forward. I think for most people is going to be the biggest opportunity in how that's going to work moving forward.
Mr. Hoskins?
Yeah, I would say I've read a few studies that showed that there are families and people in the United States are less likely to travel overseas or even travel by way of plane. So I think there are opportunities with that. I think for the thought of just people not vacationing or not working or not traveling is just, it's temporary and it can't last long. So I think that the biggest opportunity is to continue to watch travel closely and to utilize that information to the best of our ability to make decisions and provide those opportunities for growing the business back.
Yeah, definitely. Big shift in travel expectations and policies, I'm sure, both family-wise and business-wise. Mr. Abraham, biggest opportunity.
I think, we all pretty much agree. We know that it's going to be a road to recovery. And I think the hotels that can differentiate themselves, by executing the processes of cleanliness and using technology where appropriate will have better success. That's the opportunity.
Very good. Very good. So shifting again to a new format, just literally 3 words, right? Just almost word association as we wrap up on the following topics, right? So COVID, what comes to mind? A couple words, David Abraham.
Life-changing for many people. Unfortunately, not for the better.
Mr. Hoskins?
I would say serious virus, shutdown, and high cost.
Definitely high cost. Brian?
Chaos, fear, but manageable.
Kevin?
Very sad and altering experience.
So what's the one most impactful thing that could speed up this recovery? Let's start with Kevin.
Vaccine, clearly.
Brian?
Ditto.
Mr. Hoskins?
Vaccine all the way.
David Abraham?
Testing. I think testing and tracking.
It is fascinating. How many intelligent people around the entire world right now must be staying up late at night and through the weekends trying to get that one solved. I'm going to skip this one. Your single biggest concern for the future right now, Mr. Abraham?
Finding a solution, whether it's the vaccine or processes that'll keep people safe, get the public traveling again, get our staff back to work, our hotels busy again.
Amen to that. Mr. Hoskins?
No, I'd say the biggest concern is the long-term effects. What are they? We don't have a clue yet. So what are the long-term effects? That's the biggest concern.
Brian?
Similar, the unknowns. There's a lot of them out there. So the unknowns is my biggest concern.
And Kevin?
Just a very bad second wave of the virus, and also just if there is persistent and long-term unemployment.
So when do you expect occupancy to go back to pre-COVID levels? Kevin, what quarter of what year? Best guess.
2022.
2022. Brian?
Fourth quarter 2021.
David?
I would say 18 months.
Las Vegas right now is going crazy. David Abraham?
I would be hopeful for 18 months as well.
And it's a slow, steady climb till there, as long as there's no second wave, I'm hoping. So what's the one thing you do regularly to stay inspired and motivated? David Abraham?
Good thing to do is spend family time and realize, as everyone has said, it's about the future. How do we navigate through this? So just family time keeps me focused on the future.
Beautiful. David Hoskins?
I would say happy hour Zooms with my teams.
Happy hour of any kind right now.
Exactly.
Brian Gilchrist.
Drink a lot, so similar to David. I think the one thing that I do is probably pretty corny, but just look at all the different graphs from prior crises to just know that there is probably going to be an end in sight. It's just a matter of time.
I'm assuming you're being drink a lot of water because that's healthy for us.
Exactly.
Kevin, what's the thing you do?
Definitely gotten much more consistent in running and time with my kids here at home.
Good for you. You don't have to have an answer for this one, but is there anything you recommend that you've come across recently that you think is particularly inspiring, insightful, that you'd share with the group, Kevin?
Been doing a lot of surfing on Netflix, movies that I haven't seen in 20 years.
Have you seen The Tiger King yet?
Yeah.
Brian Gilchrist.
I think it's always hard. I've known people who have passed because of this and not being able to be with their families. I saw on the internet that they created a shower curtain with PVC pipe on the side with cutouts with gloves through them on both sides so that the grandparents could hug their grandkids. So if you want to do it, you'll find a way.
Indeed. Mr. Abraham.
Perfecting my outdoor cooking skills, just be outdoors.
Any predictions on the World Series this year? Are we going to have one, David? Abraham?
I believe so, yes.
Awesome.
I'm optimistic.
David Hoskins. Did we lose David Hoskins? I think we might have lost David Hoskins.
Yeah, he fell off.
Brian Gilchrist.
If we do, it'll be inconsequential.
And Mr. Carey.
As a fan in a very narrow band who's a fan of the New York Mets and the Chicago Cubs, I can always be optimistic before the season starts.
Awesome. So I'm not sure what happened to David Hoskins. Hopefully we'll get him back here. But, last thought, and then I'll give you guys a chance to share closing thoughts. But one immediate priority right now, Kevin, what is that for you? A couple words.
Definitely to support the industry with the reopening efforts. That's job number one for us right now. And that obviously cuts across our advocacy as well as strategic industry initiatives like AHLA safe state guidelines.
Oops, I had a little issue there. Very good. Mr. Gilchrist?
Staying calm and trying to make sure that gets carried over to the team members that have been, quote unquote, on the front lines while we've stayed open through all of this, and continue to try to encourage them so that they want to continue to show up and take care of our guests.
Mr. Abraham?
Similar to Kevin, we want to do everything we can at Park to support our operators and get our hotels back in business and successful.
Awesome. Good to have you back. Looks like David Hoskins is connecting. So we're on the, what's the one immediate priority that you have right now? Can you hear us, David?
I can. Can you repeat your question? I had a little technical difficulty.
No problem. What's the one immediate priority for you right now?
One immediate priority is to get back to normal. I mean, navigate and increase those revenues so that we can get back to normal.
Very good.
Safely.
We haven't had a lot of questions for the group, so I'm just going to really shift into, just any closing questions or any closing remarks that you want to share with our group today. We've got over 100 folks on the line. Start with David Hoskins. Any final closing thoughts?
No, I'd just say that, in my thoughts, this is just another issue that we have to deal with, and like issues that that people had in the 18th century. Kids, Lincoln, and lost a lot of children. A lot of people lost a lot of children for smaller things, and this is just another thing, and it soon will pass.
Indeed. Kevin?
We're fortunate from our vantage point to see so many different aspects of the industry and its employees at every level, from the entry level up through the CEOs. And what's always inspirational is just the commitment that the people in this industry have for serving people and driving the hospitality that clearly underscores and defines this industry.
Very good. Brian? Gilchrist?
I mentioned the graphs earlier about, prior crises that I've experienced in my years in the industry. And this is obviously another one. You've got to stay calm. You have to be ready for whatever that means for tomorrow and the next minute, and then execute, but execute to the best of your ability. And if you're doing those things, things will turn around and we'll get back on the other side and look back at this as another blip on the graph.
David Abraham?
I think Brian put it well, be deliberate, have a plan. I think, if we all work to stay safe and do what we can to buy time for, a virus to be developed and not, be part of, producing a second wave, as Kevin mentioned earlier, this fall. I mean, anything we can all do to avoid that would be a great task.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and thank you so much for your time, your insights, and my ability to poke a little fun here and there. It's obviously a serious topic and a serious time, and I appreciate your thoughts as we're all trying to figure out where we go from here. I also appreciate John Ott and Lisa Stern, who were key in making today happen. So everybody stay safe. I'm looking forward to getting back out to the hotels and seeing more people. But between now and then, stay safe, do well, and find whatever it is that makes you happy. So enjoy. Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.